Hi everyone, my name is Michael Jackson. Yeah, go ahead, shoot it. Go on, I know you want to. I'm from California. I'm actually from San Diego, California. Don't hold that against me. I live out there with a wife and 4 children. Possibly a dog. I have a son who wants a dog. So if any of you have a recommendation for a good dog, his birthday's coming up. I don't know, maybe something that doesn't shed. So anyway, so that's kind of who I am, where I'm from. I lived in California my whole life. I used to work in the San Francisco Bay Area, but then a couple of years ago said forget that because the house prices were going insane and it just wasn't very fun. So we went down south. I run a company called React Training. So reacttraining.com. Actually, our GitHub is more interesting. React Training. Oh, no internet connection. Let me hop on the network real quick. React. Strong password. And so this company that I started a couple of years ago with my business partner Ryan Florence he's no longer my business partner, but over the last couple of years ago we've kind of traveled around and held React workshops. We just kind of split up earlier this year, so I'm kind of running it on my own with a bunch of help from obviously a lot of other people who are helping me get the workshops organized and planned and everything, because there's a lot of logistics and stuff that needs to happen. But I'm actually just in town for a couple of days. I'm doing a couple of React workshops. Today I did a React Fundamentals workshop, and then tomorrow and the next day I'm doing an advanced React workshop over at Yellow. And I'll be in Boston in a couple weeks, and I was in New York a couple weeks ago, so I kind of travel around and teach React full time. And then the other half of my job is working on open source. So I publish quite a few open source things, the most popular one being this React Router project, which I've been working on now for about, we started working on React Router in 2014, so it's like 4 years now, which honestly just seems nuts to me. React still feels, even though I've been using it for 4 years now, it still feels very fresh, it still feels very new, still feels very, very exciting every time I get to work with React and React code. So anyway, that's a little bit about me, and that's a little bit about my company. We're on Twitter as React Training, reacttraining.com. If you want to know more about our workshops, you can go check us out there. But tonight, I thought it would be fun to build a React router, because it's not really a incredibly complex thing. It's taken us several years to get to the point where we are now with the router, and we've had to fight a lot, I feel like, to keep it as simple as it is. If you've ever done anything simple, you will know. If the finished product was simple, it's not easy to keep things simple. The complexity tends to creep in. You have to work really, really hard to keep things simple. The API that we have today with React Router version 4, which we published just over a year ago, actually, so that API has been out for quite a while now. It's actually fairly simple, and there are some really cool things coming up with React 16, specifically React 16.3, which was just released 2 weeks ago, I want to say, which are going to kind of, which we're going to be able to take advantage of in React Router to do some cool stuff. So anyway, so I thought it might make an interesting meetup talk to just go ahead and build a router together and build out the different pieces of it. And along the way, you can see behind the scenes how the router is built, and maybe it'll demystify it a little bit for you if it is kind of mystical, and maybe it'll maybe you'll kind of maybe you'll get some inspiration for how to do things differently, or do something something differently than how we're doing it right now. So anyway, I thought I'd start out with, the kind of a basic question is like, what is a router, right? And why do you even need a router? So this was something that I actually didn't really understand very well myself. Before I started using React, I was actually using Ember. And Ember had a really, really great router. And the whole idea behind a router is that it ties what you see on the page to what you see in the address bar. That's basically it. That's basically it, right? And you think, okay, so how hard could that be? So let's say you had 3 different pages. I've got some notes down here. Just going to copy from those real quick, excuse me. So we have let's say we have a home and an about and a contact page. Okay, 3 different pages in our app. Let's see. And this is just a create React app with the running React 16.3.1, I think. So running the latest stable version of React. Okay, and so let's say that we want to we want to have some links and we want to have some different pages. We want to be able to cycle through these pages by using links. So let's say instead of this tag, we're going to have, let's swap this out with a div. Okay, and then inside here, what we can basically do is we can have like we'll have a H1, welcome to the app. And we can have some navigation. And let's just say a couple of list items here. Is that font size big enough for the people in the back? Or do you want me to bump it up? Bump it up? Yeah, bump it up. How are we doing? Okay? Yeah. Up still? How's that? Hey, the bigger the font gets, the more I've got to scroll, so you just let me know when to stop. All right. It's been requested that we go this big. All right, so I've got a bunch of list items here, and I'm just going to have a bunch of links. I'll have a link to my About page, About Us. And then I'll have a couple more links here. This one will be a link to the contact page, so we can say contact us. And this will be a link to our home page, and so we can say home. Okay? So let's see how that all shakes out. So I've got Prettier running on save. So if the code jumps a little bit, or jumps around a little bit when I save, I apologize. If you're not using Prettier yet, just use it. Just forget about all those conversations that you have with your coworkers, like you put this on the same line, and they're like, I think it should be on a different line, or I think you shouldn't have a semicolon there, or like whatever. Just forget about it and just use Prettier, and then you never have any of those conversations ever again. So it's really nice. Okay, so if we have some navigation, we can see here that as we navigate around, it is changing the URL. So specifically, I'm looking at this thing right here, right? So keep an eye on that. As we click around, we're changing the URL. And why is that so important? You might think. Well, check it out. We've got back buttons and forward buttons in the browser, right? This is one piece of state that you can't always control 100%. Okay? The user can even just go up here and manipulate the URL directly if they want, So good luck trying to stop them from doing that. It's actually very, very difficult. So we've got some navigation, and this is good because we don't break the back and forward buttons. Now, if we want to tie some UI into those different URLs, one way that we could do it is, I guess the most basic way that we could do it is with a switch statement, right? We could look at the URL, and then we could decide based on the URL which piece of UI we're going to render. Okay. So I can initialize my state. I'll just keep the location in state and just put window location in state. Window.location is an object that is going to have a path name on it. Okay. And based on that path name, I could just say, if the path name is /about, then our child component is going to be the about page. We'll have a child variable up here. Break that. If our URL looks like, contact, Then our child will be the contact component. Not that one. With a capital C. There we go. Break. Otherwise, our default case, sorry, just getting a little low, is just going to be the child is going to be the home component.
That's typo instead of line 31.
Thank you. Some people, when they see me make syntax errors, they're just sitting there like, wait until this code breaks. Other people are like very nice and helpful. Like, hey, you might want to know, there's a syntax error. Now I know who my friends are. Thank you. All right. Everybody else is just like, all right. So then if I put my child down here, okay. So again, all we're doing is we're just using a switch statement. And so when we're at the /contact, now the contact component renders. We're at the /about, now the about component renders. Okay, so we've got kind of a primitive sort of navigation system going on here, right? We've got some links that the user can use to change the URL. And look, even as you hit the back and forward buttons, the page updates based on the URL, right? This is already like miles ahead of where web apps were like a couple of years ago when the back button was broken and you would click it and nothing would actually happen, right? Okay, so there are a couple of things that we want to improve about this code and that we set out to improve when we actually wrote React Router, okay? One of them is this kind of like, basically this like imperative decision making, right? Which is that, you know, you're sort of going and checking the URL and matching it against these different strings, and then, you know, trying to decide, you know, which component you should render. What if we had a declarative way of doing that? Okay. The other thing that you may have noticed, or you might not have, is that we're actually doing full page refreshes right now. So if I pop into this network tab, you will see. Actually, maybe this isn't the best way to show it, but there we go. So anyway, you don't need to see the details of what's going on. All you know is that every time I click a link, we've got a full page refresh. Now, Create React App is, lucky for us, Create React App is actually set up so that if the accept header comes in and contains text/HTML, it's just going to serve up your app. So it's always going to serve the same HTML file regardless. But if you were deploying a single page application, as we call them, to production, you would actually have to set up your production server, right? So that no matter what the URL is, even if it's /contact, you're going to serve that exact same HTML, and you're going to do the routing client side. In other words, you're going to have some logic on the client that's going to decide based on the URL what UI to show. Okay? So we're doing full page refreshes, and we're also doing this work of deciding which page to show, kind of imperatively. Okay? So let's tackle these problems one by one. I'm gonna do this one first with this this whole idea about what to render. Okay, because this one's actually pretty easy. So basically, what we need is a component that can take a look at the URL, and it can match its it has a path that it can match based on the current URL. And if it matches the URL, render something. It's kind of like, you can kind of think about this like an if statement for the URL. Okay. So instead of this child component, I'm going to make a route component, and I'm going to say when the path looks like /about, then render the about component. Okay. Pretty simple. And I'm going to do that again for the contact page. And of course for the home page. All right. Okay, so we've got this hypothetical. We haven't made it yet. Route component, and basically it says if the path is like this, render this component. One thing that these route components don't really have or know about yet is, what is the current URL, right? What is the current path? That state is being kept up here in the state of our app. So we're probably also going to have to pass along the current state to these routes. So let's just go here and say location equals this.state.location. Okay, so now Prettier is like laying them out in different lengths.
Because line 53 doesn't have a component. So I think it's getting confused.
For real?
Here. Oh,
Yeah, it does.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I said no wrap. So it was, so anyway. Stupid Prettier. Don't use Prettier. No matter who tells you to use it, do not. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, you know one way we can fix that. How about this? We'll just do this.
Cost location.
Yes, yes. Somebody's like, are you kidding me? You just typed out the same thing on 3 separate lines. Just use a constant. Here we go. Okay. Oh, that's so much nicer. Look at that. Okay. So let's make this hypothetical route component. So all of these things are going to go away. All of this imperative decision making. Oh, yeah, we don't need that path anymore. And let's make a route component. So we could say, could just be a function, really. Is going to take the location as a prop, its path, and what component we want it to render. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to say, look, if the location dot path name equals our path, then return basically a rendered version of this component. So we could React.create element of this component, or if we renamed the component with a capital C, then we could just return component. Otherwise, if we did not match, then return null. So remember I said that your route is like an if statement for the URL? It's really that simple, right? So in this case, let's see, when we're at /about, we should get the about page. When we're at /contact, we get the contact page. When we're at /home, we get the home page. Okay, or / we get the home page. Okay, so this route really is just a very, very simple way to either render something or don't, based on the current URL. Okay. So we could look at this API and we could say, okay, yeah, that's fine. You know, passing this location around, this all feels like kind of, you know, a little tedious. Why couldn't we have each of the, you know, routes themselves just use like window.location, right? And the idea is that, you know, in that case, now we have the state living in multiple places. The routes essentially are deciding, you know, what the state is for the application. Why is that important? Well, in this case, let's see. Well, we're not going to actually see why that's important until we stop refreshing the page on every click. So let's table that for now. We'll get into that. So there's this kind of boilerplate code right here that we've got right now, where we're passing the location to every single route. Okay. It would be nice if the routes could sort of get that information implicitly, right? If you just rendered a route and the route just somehow magically knew what the current location was, that would be nice. Then we wouldn't have to pass it on every single time. Okay. So this is what our router is for. Okay. So basically what we want to do is, you know, we want to pass this location implicitly. So if we took our app and wrapped it in a router, you might be looking at that and thinking, like, how is that going to help to have a component all the way up at the root here? So the idea is that the router is going to provide some context. Okay? It's going to provide some context to all of its descendants. If you don't know what context is, I actually gave a talk a couple weeks ago at the Austin JavaScript meetup, where I talked all about context and how I actually went through the React source code with the intention to hack it. And instead, I discovered that they had this secret thing called context. So I didn't need to hack it. It just wasn't, they weren't telling anybody about it yet because it was kind of unstable. Good news is that in React 16.3, it's stable. It's good, right? There's an API that is like blessed. The context API, this is the one that is good. You can use this, okay? So what am I even talking about? Well, so in order for a router to communicate the location down to all these routes, and these routes, by the way, they're just components, right? Just like any other components. They can appear anywhere in the tree. Anywhere in the tree. They're just components, okay? In order for the router to communicate with them, it needs to use this mechanism called context. So I'm actually going to use the React 16.3 API to give these routes their location. So let's see. What I'm going to do is up here, so like our router is like really, really tiny right now, right? Let's have a routing context. So I'm going to create some context. And the routing context is now an object that has two properties on it that themselves are components. So when I say component, I mean a class, component classes, okay? So the router is going to render a, let's see, routing context dot, what do they call it, provider. And the provider, so the provider has a single prop, which is this value prop, okay? And the value prop, we use that to say, this is a value that I want to provide to some consumer further down in the hierarchy. Somewhere, I don't know where it is, but I essentially want to sort of pass this information sort of implicitly throughout the tree, and then some descendant way down here can pick it up and can read that value. Okay, no matter what's in between me and them, they can get it. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this state. I'm going to move this into the router. Am I even using that state anymore down here? Oh, I am because I'm passing it. Well, it'll move. Okay, so the state, we're going to keep that in the router, and then all we're going to do is, as the value of this, we're just going to pass the location. Okay, so I'm actually going to take this out here, put this in my render here. The app doesn't need to know about that state anymore. The state is now kept in the router. And then we're also going to pass, obviously, all of our other props. Because in this case, the router has children, and we presume that the provider will just render its children. Okay, so now on the receiving end, so the router is the provider of the location context. The route itself is the one that needs to receive this context. Okay, so the route is not going to get location anymore as a prop. Okay, instead, what route is going to do is route is going to return a routing context dot consumer. Okay, and the routing, the consumer gets a render prop. And if you don't know what that is, you're in luck, because I've also given a talk about that in Phoenix last year. This guy has a talk for everything. And at the next meetup I do, I'm going to talk about this meetup. And I'll be like, if you want to know how to build the router, I gave a talk in Chicago about how to build a router. Okay, so the render prop gets the location, or basically whatever value we put in this value prop right here. So this was an object with one property, right? Location. We're going to pull that out here. We're going to pull that property off. And now we get location in the render prop. So instead of passing it as a prop, let's complete the cycle here. All of this code goes away. And there's an unexpected token. Where is it? Line 40.
Two returns.
Return.
Oh, thank you. Goodness me. This guy teaches code for a living? Give me a break. What a joker. All right. So, assuming we didn't screw up too badly, you know what? I should set the wrapping. Give me 1 second. What is it? Line width? Like 72 or something like that. Hopefully that'll change it. Let's see now. So if I go back into here and I say save, that didn't work. Unknown option line width. What is, oh, it's print width. Sorry. Jeez. What? Okay. That was weird. What? Seriously, you just put like this weird thing in all my code? Okay. All right. That may have worked, that may not have worked, I'm not sure. All right, so it looks like it's working over here, right? So router's gonna pull off the location, render a provider, it's gonna pass that value through. The routes themselves are going to implement a consumer. They're going to pull that location off of context, and they're going to use it to render. So let's see if I'm at the contact page, or the about page, or the home page. Okay, so it still works. Back and forward buttons still work. Yeah. Any questions up to this point? Real reason I asked that is so I could take a sip. Yeah, question.
Can you go to the router? Does it not need to render its children? I'm not super familiar with the new context API.
Yeah, no, so I was saying I'm just going to pass along all of my props to the provider, and I'm assuming that the provider is just going to render its children. Yeah. So my children comes in as a prop, pass it through, let the provider deal with it. Yeah, okay, so not too much code yet, right? It's not bad. How about, so that's kind of like declarative, basically path matching and routing, right? We've got these if statements, we've got a router that keeps the state and provides the context. Cool. Let's address the problem of the full page refreshes, because why do client-side routing at all if you're sending a new request to the server every single time you click a link or click the back button, right? So let's figure out what's the best way to do this. So basically what we need to do is when you click a link, we need to prevent default on that click event, right? Because the default behavior of the browser is send a new request to the server, fetch another page, show the page. So we need to prevent default on that click. Likewise, when the user is clicking the back and forward buttons or manually manipulating the URL, we need to be able to respond to those events as well, because those aren't going to be click events on links, right? Those are going to be pop state events. Okay, so there are two kinds of different events that we need to figure out how to intercept here that that are going to be used for navigation. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to swap out these anchor tags. So because I need to intercept the click on all of the anchor tags, I'm just going to implement my own component called a link. Okay, link is a better name than a anyway. All in agreement? Yes. Okay, let's do it. All right. So let's implement a link. And a link, what is it going to do? It's just going to render an anchor tag with a custom, let's see, pass through all of our props. Let's get our props out here. Let's see, let's get some on-click behavior. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say event.prevent default, okay? Which we know we need to do anyway to prevent the browser from requesting a new page. So we could have an href prop. I'm actually just going to use I'm going to call it a to prop, okay? So I'll say 2, and then the basically the anchor props equals, oops, equals props. So I'll call these the anchor props. And then the href is going to be the 2 value. And I'll show you why I'm doing that in just a second. Well, actually, maybe we won't get to it here. We'll see. Maybe we'll talk about it, maybe we won't. Okay, so link to...
You have to change the end of your lead. Got the anchor and
The closing
62, closing price 62.
Line 62.
Wow, all of you guys are my friends. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Live coding. You never know what's going to happen. Okay. So now I've got a bunch of links, but except they don't actually do anything. They don't take me anywhere. We are building a single page app, right? Instead of taking us somewhere, instead of manipulating the URL, we're preventing default. And let's just, for now, let's just window.history.pushState with the 2 prop. So wait, the state is the first argument. So null, null, and then the 2 prop. So the first argument is state. The second argument is the document title, which no browsers actually respect anyway. And then the third argument is actually the URL that you want to use. Okay, so we can just click, and we can see the URL is changing now, but the UI doesn't know about it yet. And why not? Well, it turns out there's actually no event fired. The browser doesn't fire any event when you do a push state. Reason being that you're the one who initiated the push state. Why do we need to trigger an event to tell you about the code that you just ran, right? You should probably handle that yourself, right? Makes sense. So in this case, though, we've already determined that the state lives up in our router, okay? And in this case, we don't have a router here. So what I'm going to do is, and this is not anything kind of strange. This is the same as you would do with any kind of parent-child relationship where the child component needs to set state in its parent. You could pass down a function and say, hey, if you need to affect my state, call this function, right? So what if we have like a push function, and we could have, it could take a URL argument, and here we could say window.history.pushState. We could basically do the null dance up here, null, null in the URL. And then we have the chance actually to set our own state. So we could say this.set state location is going to be window.location. Because we know that the location has changed, right? So we're setting state, we're going to affect the URL, and we're going to set our own state so that our descendants can read it. Of course, just like route, link now needs to implement the consumer. So routing context.consumer. It's going to get out that location, or sorry, we don't have the. It doesn't actually need the location. It needs that push function. Okay, so let's put something else on there called push. Okay, and then instead of calling window.history.pushState, all we're going to say is push the 2 value. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that push on context as well. So we're going to have the location, and we're also going to have a push. This.push. Does that make sense? So this is a really common pattern that we see in React, right? Provide the state, provide a method to manipulate the state. Both of those things, and we're putting both of those things on context. Here's the location, here's a method that you can use to push a new location onto the browser's history stack. And in this case, our links are the ones that need the push, and our routes up here. Let me actually move route underneath router there. Just because router kind of feels like the big parent of both of them, right? Router is the provider. So route needs the location, needs to read the location, and link needs the push to affect the location. Does that make sense? So let's see. So now, when I click a link, I'll say contact about. So now I've got that behavior back that I had before, right? Except look at the network tab. No page refreshes, right? We're just pushing state. Push state. Here, where are we? Here's our push method. Push state onto the URL, and then set our state with the new location that we get out of the window location. What about? The back button's busted. Like seriously, we just jumped through all these hoops and we're right back in 1998. The back button is still broken, right? Remember I said there are two ways to affect the URL. One is the clicks on the links. The other one is, somebody's got it, pop state. Pop state, right? There's a pop state event. Let's go up here. So we're going to go up here to our router. So the router is the one that's got the state again. On component did mount. Let's add an event listener. Window dot add event listener for the pop state event. When we get a pop state, actually I'm going to put this in a handle pop state method. And that's only so that I can remove it. So I'll just make a component will unmount. Don't forget to clean up after yourself. Okay, so this, so window.remove event listener, okay? So what are we going to do in the handle pop state? Well, we know that the Windows location has changed, so we should probably just do this.
You want that to be component will unmount?
Thank you. Yeah. Setup, tear down. Yeah, thank you. So we're going to handle the pop state event. In fact, we don't even need that argument. And so pop state is the thing that gets triggered whenever you hit the back and forward buttons in browsers that support the pop state API, or the HTML5 history API, basically, which is all the Evergreen browsers. Okay, so now if I hit the back button, forward, back, link, back, forward. All right, we're kind of there, right? I mean, we've got declarative routing, right? Declarative routing right here. We've got links that are able to affect the state, and we've got a router that's able to read the state and provide it to all of its descendants. Any questions up to this point? So at this point you might be thinking, well, why doesn't React Router just do all of this? This is essentially React Router version 5. Okay? We've got a couple of extra things going on in React Router, right? Namely, so there are various ways that these routes can actually match the URL, right? So the route, for example, if you had, let's say instead of contact, this was like inbox. And you wanted to be able to do some sort of dynamic sort of matching, like, on the URL, right? So a dynamic segment of the URL. So we pull in the path to regex library, and we basically just convert that path to a regular expression, match on that, and then, in fact, what the heck? Let's just do it. Do we have time? How much more time do we got, Bill?
We got time.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I like it. Yarn add path to regex. All right. Okay, so we got the dependency here. So let's swap out. Well, instead of swapping out contact, let's just add a new route. We'll call it inbox. Inbox. Okay. And then we'll have this ID as well. Okay. So let's make a new component. So this is basically all of our router code. So let's have a new component up here. Function inbox. Okay. And so inbox, basically the idea here is, we want a way to look. Here, I'm just gonna. For some reason, I can't type and talk at the same time very well. You'd think I'd have learned that by now. It's my job, right? Okay, so basically, we want inbox is going to be kind of like we're going to render some sort of inbox Chrome. If I go to /inbox /:ID. Then it matches. But the whole point is we want this to be like an integer, right? Like 5 or something like that, right? And in this case, the app it's lost, right? Because it doesn't match that URL, right? So what we want here is let's include a little bit of extra logic into our route component, okay? So what we can say is we've got a regex that is, let's import it. Import, let's see, path to regex from path to regex. Okay. Our regex is path to regex of path. And now, instead of just saying if the location path name matches the path, our if statement is going to look a little bit more like if regex.test on the path. I think that'll work. It's been a long time, honestly, since I've worked with the path to regex API. We might need to look up the docs here in just a second. And actually, let's do this match up here. And then we can just say, if there was a match, we could actually just render the component, whatever component it is, we can give it this match prop. And then,
location.
sorry?
Do you want to test on the location?
Thank you. Yeah. So we're basically saying, take this path that looks like a pattern, it's got a :ID, whatever in it, compile that to a regular expression. And this is, by the way, the same library that you would use in like an Express app to do routing in an Express server. So it's very, very familiar to a lot of JavaScript programmers. So take that path pattern, compile it down to a regex, test that regular expression on the location path name. If there was a match, provide that match to the component that we're actually using to render. So let's save that and see if the app does not blow up. Okay, so this is good. So the inbox is now matching with this dynamic URL, right? Inbox/5. Let's take a look at that match thing. Let's see. Inbox is going to get a parameter called match. And this thing should be able to give us out our, oh, come on. Oh, true. That's all it gave us.
It matched.
Test, regex test. Yeah, that's not terribly useful. Can somebody look up this API real quick?
Exec.
No, exec is just gonna, well, yeah, so exec is gonna, I think they give you like a function. All right, pillar.js. Let's see, what is your API? Compile this thing and keep an array around of the keys. And then the keys are gonna come back populated. I guess? Yeah, I don't know.
Path to regex is a function.
It is a function. So it's a regular expression. No, path to regex is a function, and then this thing is a regular expression that you have to like give it some keys ahead of time or something weird. Here. Like that. It's the kind of work that you do it once and then you're like, forget about that. All right, so what is it going to do now? Is it going to populate that array of keys? Yeah, so if I match, the keys are going to be all this stuff. So name bar. Oh, so it's going to be an array of names and something. Where do I get the value? All right. Clearly the match is not what we wanted. Let's pass through those keys as well. See what the heck those are. All right. Keys is an array with one thing in it. Dying to find out what that thing is. It is a thing with name ID. But where do I get the 5 out? Oh, the match thing, I guess? Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. I'm remembering this now. So basically what we need to do is we need to be more awesome with these props that we're passing here. So we could say const params, let's call it params, equals keys dot reduce, and then we'll have the key, and then start this out with an object. Okay, so what I want is an object that's like, the ID was 5, right? Doesn't seem like an unreasonable requirement, but we're gonna have to do it ourselves. All right, so what we're gonna say is memo of this sub key equals basically match at this thing's index. So I think reduce gets index as the 3rd argument. Help me out, yeah? Then return the memo. All right, so match, and then we'll give you the params. How many people think that's going to work? Oh, come on. Hey, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the vote of confidence. All right, so instead of these keys things, let's give a params. Let's say params. Okay, let's see what params is. Oh, almost. So close. What it's going to be is not index, but it's going to be index plus 1. And then key is going to be, why is the key an object? Doesn't make any sense. Keys.reduce.
It's not a string. It's
not a string.
It is an object. It's got we're probably looking for key.name.
Yes! Now how many people think it's going to work? All right, we got one more. 2 more people. Like, I don't know. We really got to run this thing to see. All right. So then we're going to get... all of you. All of you. You should feel so ashamed right now. Because nobody thought it was going to work. High five. You thought it was going to work, and you. All right. Okay, so we can get the parameters out, and now we can say something like inbox. We'll just say like this. And then we'll say now showing message with params.id. Whatever you want to do. Oh, come on, for real? Now showing message params.id. Why is it upset about that? Cannot read property ID of undefined. What do you mean? We just saw that it wasn't undefined. This given the fact that there are no suggestions forthcoming from the audience, I'm assuming that you are all just as confused as I am. Params.
Isn't params
It's
a prop?
match.params.
It's props.params.
It's what dot params?
Props?
Oh.
Match.params.
No, I mean that's how it is in the real React router.
Can you go back down to consumer?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back down to the consumer. So match, get this thing called params. Oh, match! Frick. Thank you. This is the part where I sheepishly say, you know when I was correcting you and you were right? Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Okay, so it's gonna expect match and params props. Thank you. Okay, now showing message 5. You know, if we didn't want to, we could say params.id. If so, we will put this string here. I can't put a thing inside of it. Let's just make this the div. And we'll make this the paragraph tag. And then we'll say otherwise, there's a paragraph tag that says just null, I guess. Oh, jeez. Open, close, closing div, thank you. Who needs syntax checkers when you're live coding in front of an audience of 50 people? And so then if we don't have one, then it just doesn't show. Oh! Here's something interesting. Our inbox component only matches at /inbox/ something, right? So we can make that ID parameter optional. There you go. So /inbox/ 4. Okay, so there we go. So we're parsing out parameters now. We can do all sorts of other features. There are a couple of other components. I won't take the time to bore you with them, but there's a switch component in React Router. And that switch component basically is going to loop through the routes and figure out which is the first one that matches, just like a switch statement. You just wrap a bunch of routes in a switch, and it'll render the first one that matches the URL. There's also like a redirect component. So if you wanted to redirect to another URL, you could just render one of those. And in that case, the redirect component is actually kind of interesting because the route, it's not a push, right? It's not a push. You don't push a new thing onto the URL stack. In that case, you just do a replace. So you do a window.history.replace state instead of window.history.push state. So there are a couple of cool things. I'm going to show you just one demo, and then I promise I'll be done, and we'll just take some questions, okay? And this is a demo that uses the real React Router. Let me just, I'm going to stop my app there. I'm going to start up React Router, and this is something that anybody here could do if they just get clone React Router, npm install, npm start. They go ahead and start it up. I go to web. Oh geez, JSX style. I want to show you this recursive paths demo, because I think this one's actually really relevant. And because some people, every once in a while, somebody will ask me something like, hey, why are you using components for these routes, right? Why aren't you using a static route config? like other routers, right? Your Nginx config, your Apache config, heck, your Express config, your Rails config. All of these are routers that you statically define the routes once, and then you're done, right? Those are all the routes that your application recognizes and knows how to do, okay? Let's see, I'm going to open up this example. This is called the recursive paths example, okay? So if the component is just, or sorry, if route is just a component, what does that buy us? Okay. One, it means that we don't have to really teach you the API. You already know how to use components. It's easy. Two is that you can dynamically generate components, right? You do it all the time, right? You have conditional logic in your render method, or maybe you have a loop or whatever, where you dynamically generate components. Say you're dynamically generating items in a list, or you're dynamically showing and hiding an element, adding and removing it, to and from the page, right? You do this all the time. Well, if route is a component, we can do those exact same things with routes, right? Which means essentially that routes could also be dynamic. They could come into being. They could only, exist when some condition is met. Okay? Let's take a look at this example. So we've got, a list of people here and their friends, essentially, okay? So Michelle, Sean, Kim, David, and then we have an array of all their friends, okay? So at the root, we're just going to start out with person 0 and an empty URL, okay? And so what does a person component render is the question. So we're going to go and find that person, render that person's name. So in this case, Michelle's friends. And then we're going to loop through that person's friends. Then here we've got all the IDs, and we've got a link to all of her friends, okay? And notice this other thing that we've got down here. We've got a route, okay? Which matches the current URL. So we provide you this thing called match.url, which by the way, gives you the actual URL that was matched up to this point, plus one more dynamic segment. What happens if we match that route? We're going to render another person component, right? So let's click on, for example, Sean. Okay, so Sean's friends are Michelle and David. So we render, go and find the person. That's Sean. Sean's friends. We map over Sean's friends, and then we get a link to each of his friends, and another route that is, and by the way, notice the URL /1, that's Sean's ID, okay? And so we've got another route here now that only exists because we're at /1. Plus one more segment is going to bring another route into being. So we could actually hop back into Michelle and render Michelle's friends again, right? And notice the URL /1/0, right? So let's hop back into Sean again, David, David's friends, Kim. And you can notice with each segment, this really is a recursive example, right? I'm rendering the same component again and again and again, but these routes are sort of dynamically being generated as we go down the tree and as the URL gets longer. Oh, and by the way, check out this back button. It's just going to pop segments off the URL, right? So you might be like, this is a totally stupid demo. Why on earth is this man showing me this recursive weirdness, right? You use apps with recursive routes every single day, okay? Let's take the Twitter app. Okay? Here I am in my home feed, okay? Pop into a tweet. He quoted another tweet. Pop into that one. Slides another view in, right? Let's see. Who liked it? Another view slides across. Oh, let's look at this person. Swept in, another view dropped in. Let's look at their, what they're tweeting. Oh, look, somebody else gave them a tweet. And we are drilling so far down now, and we can just back, and drill all the way back up, and just pop off those views. So those views are dynamically being generated. Those routes are dynamically being generated as we're drilling down into the app, right? It would be impossible for you to build a static route config for an app with this kind of navigation paradigm. It would not be possible for you to predict ahead of time all of the routes. Usually what happens when you have an app like this and you have a static router, usually what happens is you have you have one route that's kind of like the catch-all. It's like path equals star. Right? Imagine you're building like a file navigation thing, right? Path equals star. Match anything that goes on beyond this. And then what you end up doing is you end up parsing out the URL yourself to figure out, okay, what actually are we going to render in the UI, right? But if you have a dynamic router, right, a router that's just built out of components, like React Router is, you can dynamically generate routes as the user enters new pieces of your UI. Because they're just components, you could dynamically load them from the server, right? These routes don't even have to exist. The client doesn't even have to know about these routes before you dynamically load them and render them, okay? So that's one of the cool things that we get from being a dynamic router. I'll take questions now, go ahead.
So I'm wondering if you chose the history as kind of a store for your history.
Oh yeah, for the
Like
real
the
React
browsers.
Router, yeah.
Is there any limit? Because you can go infinitely deep. At some point, I think there's like a limit to the URL length.
Yeah. So the question is, history, essentially the URL stack, we're using the URL stack as our store for state. The URL can only be so long. Yeah, that's true. I guess just at that point, like if you use a URL that's too long, your app's gonna break. I think it's like something like it's like the 65,000
Okay, so something.
characters. It's something huge, but yeah, I mean that's definitely a limitation of the browsers. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I used the old React Context API when it was a breaking feature.
Good for you.
Yes, I
High
loved it. And that API used prop types as a
Yep.
way of accessing context.
Yep.
And so you didn't have to pass in context explicitly via props.
Uh-huh.
With the new context API, you're pretty much like passing in props every time a component needs access to its parent context. My question is there a way to do it without explicitly passing in props? Specifically because...
You mean this value prop?
Correct.
This, where was it?
Because you would have to wrap it in the consumer and then pass it down to the children.
Yeah. So this value prop that we're putting in the provider,
Correct.
you're saying, how would you like this to be?
Yeah, so like ultimately a lot of components that I've worked with like the Mapbox API,
Yep.
and a lot of it uses WebGL, so it renders
Yep.
to canvas, which means it's one single DOM node.
Yeah.
Which means that ultimately all those components, those layers, pop-ups you're creating, doesn't have any like divs or any content really, because you're just you just want the parent to have the context and
yeah.
pass it to children.
This sounds like a kind of specific question you're at that I'd be happy to answer, but let's talk about it maybe afterward a little
Sure.
bit. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Sorry, I totally dodged that one. I feel like Mark Zuckerberg. Are you able to track users on other websites? I'm really not sure about that. I'm gonna have to ask my team about that one. All right, question in the back.
Yeah, on the route for the inbox where you had like the dynamic URL parameter, or the ID, say you were reaching out to an API and like
Yep.
the component didn't mount,
Yep.
and you're fetching the resource for that ID.
Yep.
If the user switches to, say you're an inbox/1, then you're an inbox/2,
Yep.
that route component will not unmount and remount, right?
Yep.
So how do you just have to listen to prop changes? Is that how you?
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
an issue I had, I guess, when it was unexpected and I realized what was happening.
Yeah.
What's
So
the
it's
best
gonna
way around that?
get a component will receive props call where you're gonna get a different ID prop now. If you or in the new React 16.3 API component will receive props, I guess is deprecated, going away. And you would use get derived state from props. If you did want to force it to remount, you could always just put a key on your route. That's how we force components to remount, right? You could say the key is the ID that's in the URL. And, the ID changed, so React is going to say, well, the key is different, so unmount, remount is going to go all the way through all the life cycle again.
So where you're listing your routes, you would use like a anonymous function to get those.
Well, yeah, I would just, you could do it right here, right? You could say, in the inbox, render a, message component with key of params.id, and in there you could do the fetching if you wanted to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We also have a render prop on the routes themselves. And you could do it in there as well. So you could do something like, you could do it like, sorry, trying to find my routes. Here they are. So you could do something like this, render, and then in here you could get the match and the params. Again, please remember that in this talk, this is not real React Router API. This is hypothetical stuff. So we could say something like, render the inbox key equals params.id, and then everything else that it means, right? So you could do it at this level too if you didn't want to have to drill down one more level in the inbox component. Yeah, keys is how you unmount, force it to unmount. Yeah.
So I've been using React Router on a project. I recently took a look just in my free time at something like Redux little router.
Yeah.
It was, and it seems like maybe what that's doing is static routing. At least it's defined
Probably.
separately.
Yeah.
So that's one thing you just pointed out is sort of being like a distinction between React Router
Yeah.
and other routing solutions.
Yeah.
Are there other architectural decisions that React
Yeah.
Router made that we should be aware of when we're considering the trade-offs?
Well, so the main thing about React Router is it really is just React, right? So if you use a router that's built for Redux, you have to bring Redux into your stack, which is maybe some people consider that a foregone conclusion. I don't. I bring in Redux if I need it. If I don't, I don't use it. So it's just a React router. So assuming you're using React, you can use the React router. Also, I find that it's actually a fairly easy thing to explain to people how to use components, right? Because they're like, yeah, duh, it's a component. I've used a bazillion components before. And so one of the things that we really wanted to make sure we were doing with this API, which again is just React, is we're just using React components. In versions 2 and 3, which actually weren't that different, we had a lot of our own kind of custom API. I don't think we were really we didn't know how to do everything that we wanted to do with just React yet. It's only after we've been using React for a couple of years that we were just like, this whole thing really could just be components. And so I think a lot of routing solutions that are kind of being I just haven't seen anybody else actually doing dynamic routing up to this point. I mean, even if you look at native routers on native devices, like take React Navigation for example, or UI tab view controllers. The navigation paradigm is still very explicit and it's very imperative. You say go and fetch that view and slide it on the top. Okay, now go and fetch that other view and slide it on the top. And it's not. It doesn't feel declarative in the sense that you can just say, there is another route that will match this extra segment of the URL. And when it does, go ahead and render this thing, right? So for me, React Router in that case, in that sense, feels a little bit more passive instead of, a little bit more declarative instead of you sort of imperatively having to go and manage the views yourself. So anyway, do most applications need dynamic routing? Probably not. I think it's becoming more and more common with, especially apps where, user-generated content is very common. But it does also provide some really nice benefits. What if you didn't need dynamic routes, but you just needed a conditional route, right? It's the same thing. What if you wanted to say something like, user is auth, and that was a special route. Right? So if route is just a component, you can express that logic naturally in your render method. If route is not a component and you define all of this stuff statically up front, you're going to have to find a place to put that logic somewhere. Yeah. That makes sense? People sometimes ask me, how do I do protected routes? How do I do? It's a component. You can choose whether or not to render it. And for some people, it's whoa. I think there was a tweet a couple weeks ago where somebody did this and they had 500 likes, and I need to get better at I guess telling people about the router, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do with it that how you've been working with something for a long time, you kind of don't realize what you have. I think that may be a little bit the case with us who work on the router. It's oh yeah, of course, if you wanted a route, if you didn't want somebody to access a route, you just wouldn't render it. And you can make that kind of decision when it's just a component. All right, I don't want to keep everybody here hostage for the rest of the night. I'm Michael Jackson. I'm M Jackson on Twitter, M Jackson on GitHub, M Jackson on NPM, pretty much anywhere you go. And then reacttraining.com, and React Training on Twitter is my business. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and see you next time.